Welcome back for the third week in a row of the Bradford Mark Messmer show, and Messmer is back with us.
I think Bill has been replaced.
Yeah, it's kind of starting to feel like it. So, a lot on the state docket. We'll actually start with the big issue, which of course is the budget.
Well, the budget passed out of the Senate Appropriations Committee on Thursday, and it'll be eligible for amending. I don't know if they'll do the amending on Monday or Tuesday. But there's not likely to be a lot of floor amending, on the budget at this point. I mean, it's really, it spent about the same, $31.5 billion over 2 years as the House did. I think they said there was about $11 million difference in spending between the two versions. Some of it is just shifting priorities on, where it gets allocated. But primarily the same numbers that the House had. The biggest component of the budget is obviously K through 12 education. There was an additional $466 million in K through 12, and about the same as what the House had. But we did some varying in our priorities on how we allotted that money. Biggest adjustment, and for all the county schools, it's pretty much about $200 more per kid per year, roughly. It might vary just a little, from one school to the other. And on top of that, each school gets performance bonuses for their percentage of kids that graduate. I mean, there's another $30 to $50 per student of performance bonuses above and beyond their normal budget allotment. And there's about another $800 per teacher in teacher performance bonuses, which $800 that has to go to teacher salaries above and beyond the other money that's budgeted to effective and highly effective teachers. So, and in our Senate Bill 566 that we had earlier in the session that, I would expect to come back around from the House side, half of those performance bonuses get built into their base pay each year. I mean, they can continue each year to get performance bonuses above and beyond their, their normal salary, and the bill we passed earlier, which I would think some version of that will end up, whether it's in the final budget or Senate Bill 566, but half of each of their performance bonuses gets built into their base salary, so each year they can effectively continue to get raises from that. Also within the budget is fully funding the shift of community corrections. They're going to start housing the nonviolent drug offenders, those types of folks locally, and do more, rehab, rehabilitation with them, more drug rehab programs. And they're fully funding. I think it's about $180 million that's going to go to local jails to fund those programs, taking it from just shifting money that was going to be allocated to state correctional facilities and shifting that funding to the to local. That's going to follow up on the House Bill 1006 corrections bill we did last year. So we knew that in this budget cycle the money was intended to to come into place to fund those transitions, and that's all fully funded. Back in the K through 12 funding, the Senate fully funded. The full-day kindergarten, the House budget did have the same numbers of dollars, but the way they've always done it is kindergarten students get counted as half day, and then there was an additional bonus on top of that for to give you the effective full-day funding of kindergarten. In the Senate budget, they just treat them as full-time students in how they calculate the numbers. So. Slight different way to do it, the same net effect. I think there were some comments in the local paper last week that the state wasn't funding full-day kindergarten in the House budget, and they indeed did the way they always have done it. The roughly $4,600 per student for kindergarten was in the House budget. They just approached it a little differently, and the Senate budget just treats it as a full-day student. So it also, the Senate budget doubles the money that the state allows for students that are English as a second language. So, we've got a lot of, and some Hispanic in our area, but really across the state, a variety of languages that people move into from countries across the world. Some schools have as many as 20 or 30 different nationalities of students that they're dealing with, and just extra money in the budget, doubling that amount for teaching English to students that don't speak English. So a lot of good pieces in the budget. Obviously, when the revenue forecast comes out Wednesday, Thursday next week, during conference committee is when they'll make adjustments to the budget on different categories to account for the final forecast that we get.
Now, there's a couple things there that could get a lot of play. I want to start with something you didn't really mention much, but charter schools has been a big issue, and of course the governor was a little upset that wasn't funded.
The governor proposed $1,500 per student to charter schools to allow them to do capital maintenance, building maintenance and capital improvements on their buildings. The charter schools, our public schools, they get the dollars per student at 90% of what other public schools get in the Senate budget. I think the House had them budgeted at the same baseline as the other public schools, and the governor had proposed, and the House had included $1,500, towards capital money. We took that out. That's going to be an item that Senator Kenley said, okay, if it's valid, if it's worthy to do, let's do a study committee, to look at is the amount correct? Is it valid? Most traditional public schools probably spend $2,000 to $3,000 per student for capital expenditures as an average across the state. So the dollars that he had asked for may or may not be valid. I mean, most of those charter schools moved into vacated old public schools that they got for $1. So they don't really have any they don't have any debt that they're carrying for those, which a lot of the money that goes to into the public school property tax, part of the funding is to pay debt service and bonds that for construction projects. But about a third of the charter schools, we've got about 60 across the state. Not a lot really in total. About a third of them do a really good job, and about 2/3 of them do average to to poor. And do we really want to reward all of them with the same incentive? It might be something just like we do performance bonuses for graduation rates and extra money to our traditional public schools. There wouldn't be anything wrong with if it looks like it's a valid thing to do, make it based on performance. But I don't think Senator Kenley and the Senate caucus as a whole had a real high degree of comfort with the governor's plan, so that got pulled out. And I would expect that'll be an item of discussion in conference committee time, but I don't anticipate seeing that come back as a capital expenditure this session.
Okay. The second thing I wanted to talk about before we move to the next thing, you mentioned the drug rehab. Or those programs you're funding. It seems to be a bigger and bigger issue as time goes on.
It really does, and maybe it's just our awareness, as a society. But it seems like drug problems, drug addiction issues. I mean, that's a heavy component in a lot of the crime. Is folks who have drug problems and then commit crimes to fund those those addiction issues. It's an item that has gotten a lot of additional awareness, and there's a lot of programs. A lot of sheriffs across the state are doing really very effective through religious organizations about getting in and working with inmates and getting them to reprioritize their lives, and has greatly reduced recidivism. Get the right word for that. In the places that have done that, I know Sheriff Harbstrite in Daviess County and the sheriff at Spencer County both have very highly effective programs, to deal with those drug addiction problems with the inmates, and very very effective at getting them, getting their lives turned around when they're out of prison. So that and I guess another big component that we've got a significant, I think $30 million more on mental health issues in this budget, and that's locally been a topic of a lot of discussion. I've had folks call me who have who have family members that are incarcerated. A lot of it's due to mental health issues. They get off their medication, they get into trouble, they get into prison, and then knowing there's money in there to to train correctional staff on how to identify mental health issues. There's money to help an additional $30 million in the budget for treatment of mental health issues as well. So both of those issues I think have really grown in awareness the past few years, and we're trying to allocate dollars to try to deal with those as effectively as we can in this budget.
So a bit of a different form of dollars and cents now. You guys moved through with this riverboat casino bill that's been a big deal.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. The final bill was passed out of the Senate this week. House Bill 1540, I believe, was the bill number, and it does allow all the casinos to move on to land. The ones that are on boats, and people say, well, French Lick's not on a river. Well, the original casinos that were started 20 plus years ago, when they were all initially approved, were intended to be boats. They were intended to cruise. It didn't take too long to figure out that weather conditions and state boundaries and other issues made cruising on those boats difficult and impractical, and so most of them have been docked for after just a few years of that initial plan, and most of those boats have kind of hit their life cycle and time to be replaced. And they said, rather than spend money to refurbish or replace a boat, give us the opportunity to move on land. And that was the final piece included that. It included some changes to French Lick's language on how to fund their. They're going to take away the requirement for them to do admissions fees that the casinos pay based on attendance, and some ways to fund that, and some tax rate adjustments for the casinos. Probably could have been more encompassing, but I think in the end, the ones that want to move on land, I know Evansville has definitely got a plan to do that. As soon as this gets approved, they're probably the first ones ready to pull the trigger. The ones up on Lake Michigan are could be viable enough and are ready, and have done enough things, with their site, to make it a very viable move. Some of the ones that are struggling or are not doing a high degree of volume right now, closer to Cincinnati, Lawrenceville, they probably won't do anything right away. And down the road we'll continue to look at, okay, we addressed the most pressing need, was giving them that authority to move, and then some other tax rate changes based on casino volume and other things might eventually come into play as well. Part of the agreement, or part of the initial push, was to let the racinos in Anderson and Shelbyville have live dealers, and currently they have video machines that simulate playing blackjack and simulate playing roulette, and they do those things all electronically now. It would not be a big step. It doesn't increase gaming by allowing them to have live dealers. It does, when you have live dealers, it does increase the participation of patrons at those events. But that was set up in this bill to give them that opportunity. I think after 5 years, it allows it. They have to request it 5 years from today to get that put into place, and they were in agreement if it kept the bill alive and didn't have a threatened governor's veto, for him perceiving it to be an increase in gaming, then they were willing to take that bite and just know in time it will happen for them. So everybody seemed reasonably satisfied with it. Probably nobody extremely happy, and a lot of times on a bill like that, if nobody is totally happy and everybody everybody got a little bit of what they needed, that it was probably well done. If somebody was jumping for joy, then it might not have been a great bill. So ones that one like that's really hard to address everything completely, and there's budget impacts to every change you make too. So all those things, and how you impact local revenue and state revenue. I think most of the changes were done to tie the local revenue source and the state revenue source. If the casinos are successful, both benefit. If the casinos see continued decline in revenue, both will feel the dip as well. So I mean, some of those local revenue funding sources were kind of tied to, up or down. They state and local move together. So.
Okay. Moving down the list a little bit, you guys are also working on what's kind of become a new issue with e-cigarettes, or vaping as they call it.
Yeah, that's a legal product that's currently unregulated. And I don't know that there's been any real disasters in our state, but there's been scenarios across the country where maybe a small child got a hold of one of the bottles of e-vape liquid, and they do contain nicotine and at a concentration where there's been fatalities caused by children getting their hands on a bottle of the product. And they had a bill that passed this week that requires them to label the product, requires it to have child safety caps on the product, requires some degree of sanitation in the places that it's packaged and manufactured. And then some security requirements for the places that manufacture it, just to give some degree of security to the nicotine and components that are there when they manufacture it. So I think it passed by I think it was about a 36-13 final vote. I think the percentages in the House were about the same. So that'll go on it could go to conference committee if the House sponsor dissents to the bill, but so we might see it again, or they could concur and then do a final vote on the House. But we had a Senate bill and a House bill that were kind of moving along the same path. They ended up just taking the House bill that I think Representative Mahan had started, and finished the work on it in the Senate, and I think most of the changes were done with the agreement of the House authors, so I would expect probably just a final concurrence vote on that one and wrap it up.
Seems like it's not really much of an alternative to regular cigarettes, though, judging by what I read anyway.
It doesn't have the tar and the smoke components of it. I mean, most of them have nicotine. Most of them have varying degrees of nicotine. So if you want to use it as a product to help you withdraw from use of cigarettes, it is a viable way to do that. Most of them have some type of a refillable pen that that you put the product in, and I guess the water vapor is about the only thing that's discharged from it. So I don't want to call it a safer. It would be a safer alternative to cigarettes because it doesn't have the tar and the benzenes and things that can be in tobacco smoke, but I guess it's a little safer alternative to smoking, but could be no less addictive, because the nicotine product is the addictive product, but felt like it was necessary. At some point, the federal government will there are e-cigs that are different than the refillable e-liquids, and the e-cigs are already treated the same as cigarettes on how they're regulated federally, but the e-liquid, the refillable product, and we made the same application on you can't sell it to a minor. We put the same things that we have. We also have statutes that cigarette companies make a product called e-cigs that are just slightly different than the e-vapor on how they were treated in code, and we really kind of tied a lot of the rules together for both types of those products.
And then the last thing from this area before we head to your legislation, you had a busy week yourself, but they finally fixed a provision with I-69's construction that really nobody knew about.
It was a provision that got tucked into into one of the original major moves funding bills, something that slipped under the radar, and during conference committee I can just imagine how it happened, but it prohibited construction of I-69 where I-69 is going to follow State Road 37 to Martinsville. From Martinsville to Indy, that route hasn't been finalized yet and probably won't for a little bit, but there was a provision tucked into a bill 2005-2006 that said you can't build I-69 in Perry Township. And once you get into Marion County on I-37 or State Road 37, near kind of near the Greenwood area, you're entering Perry Township, and we're constitutionally prohibited from saying where a road can be constructed. The legislature is not allowed to dictate location of roads. I guess they found that to be a problem in the 1800s and put that in the Constitution in the 1850s. So if we can't say where a road can go, my opinion is we have no business saying where a road can't go. And so there's a House bill passed out of the House pretty strongly, passed out of committee. I think on Thursday this week it'll be up for amending and final passage, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday next week. But it's an issue that needs to be supported. NDOT may very likely choose to go another route, but if they wanted to follow 37, all the way into Indianapolis, currently they couldn't, and there's really no reason to tie their hands. I mean, they'll do the traffic flow pattern, the construction costs, the economic development analysis, for multiple routes, whether it hits I-70 on the west side of Indy, I-65 on the south side of Indy, or takes 37 on in. They'll compare multiple route options and see what makes the best economic sense, for the state as a whole. And I think it's House Bill 1305, I believe is the number. I would expect it to pass out of the Senate, but it'll probably be interesting to hear the floor debates from the folks from Perry Township who got that put in back in 2005. Senator Miller is the one pushing against it the most. And it always bothers me a little bit when people say, "Oh, I want this project, but not in my backyard." That really shouldn't have been allowed to get tucked into one of the bills originally. And I'll be supporting the repeal of that legislation.
And of course, the highway's still under construction between Crane and Bloomington, and they're starting in that area. From your own viewpoint, or I guess from the viewpoint of people in Indianapolis and the legislature, are people satisfied with how fast it's moving, or do they want to see?
I think it's pretty well on. The Crane to Bloomington segment got a little bit behind schedule because they redesigned some, where they were going to do large areas of fill. They changed and redesigned and put some bridges in place, and weather was not all that productive. There was, the rain like we're getting now isn't very productive for putting asphalt down. But I think all the grade work is pretty well set. They were originally hoping to have that, that Bloomington to Crane segment open by this spring. It'll probably be more like, in the fall, before the construction season wraps up. That should be open to there. And the Bloomington to Martinsville segment is well on its way. They're doing frontage road work. They're doing, they're getting, a lot of that, the banks and things, cleaned up and trees cleared and everything they need for interstate grade, construction on that. So that's pretty well on track to hit within a couple years of that segment being done. While they're working on that, it'll be interesting to see once they start closing down lanes to build overpasses and structures, how that bottles up traffic flow on that State Road 37 segment. But so the next couple of years might be interesting, traveling on that route. But it's on pace, and to get to Martinsville, and then from Martinsville to Bloomington, I think is going to be another couple of years after that. But I think things are, progressing, pretty well. The funding's all in place for the Bloomington to Martinsville segment. We'll have to look from Martinsville to Indianapolis, whether that's done with public-private partnership, bonding. I don't think it can be tolled unless the legislature, passes a law allowing tolling. I guess that was another one of the things they did in 05-06 was said, that you couldn't toll any of it if you didn't toll all of it. So at this point, none of it's been planned to be tolled, and that probably won't either. But there'll have to be, some long-term funding strategy set up, for that last segment. But a lot of that's going to depend how the federal highway bill work, progresses over the next couple of years. That's been a very unpredictable segment of our highway funding the last few years. But I think we'd all love to see it quicker. Sooner the better for us folks down in southern Indiana. But it is making headway, and on target. I think 2019 is probably when the last segment to Indy is scheduled to be wrapped up, and I think things are still on target for that.
So we had a busy week at the state level. How about a busy week for you? You had a couple of things happen.
Had a busy week. We had 35 bills that we did final passage on, during normal Senate session. I had a bill that came back from the House, the propane liability bill. We passed out of the Senate. One of the Senate civil law committee members enhanced it a little better, gave the propane companies even more protection than the bill I had filed originally included. The House Judiciary Committee took it back to basically where I started with it. So it was an easy concurrence. It really gives them an affirmative defense ability in court that they wanted. Basically, it ended up how I filed it, and so I was able to concur on that and got unanimous passage on it on Tuesday. And then I had the farm winery bill. Finally got my hearing in the House this week and got that bill out of committee. It'll be up for final passage on the floor in the House next week, and ended up really addressing all the concerns the farm wineries had on we've got a tiered fee structure now, that the entry fee for getting a direct ship license would be this, at $100 for the first 1,000 cases of wine they ship, and then at every 1,000 cases it goes up $100. So it lets the low volume folks get in at a price they can afford. The folks like Oliver Winery, who are probably in the 3,000 cases per year now already, it'll allow them to get up to a volume point where they can see some growth in their sales as well. But it'll really help small farm wineries. We eliminated the need for a customer to come in and buy in person first, and that was prohibitive, to them being able to sell to customers and across the state. So took away all the face-to-face requirements, got their fee structure tiered in to where it helps the small guys and the big guys, and looking forward to that one passing to allow the folks like Monkey Hollow and French Lick and everybody. There's a lot of wineries in our area. I think I got 5 or 6 that are either in my district or in the county next to it. It'll allow them to grow if their sales grow, and their employment grows. I mean, we can get employment growth one big job at a time, or we can get it from hundreds of small companies growing a few employees at a time. And so good opportunity for them to grow their businesses and help support the state economy.
So yeah, good employment numbers. Had a lot of course, workforce participation's going up.
Mm-hmm. We're seeing real private sector industry employment growth in the state. The more folks we get on the payrolls, then maybe those revenue forecasts that we're not looking forward to next week. The more people we get, income tax and sales tax are 90% of the budget, and I mean the gaming revenues are really a pretty small component of it. But the income and sales tax are the lion's share. That's driven by economic growth. That's driven by employment. All those things go hand in hand. So the higher employment participation we have, the higher all of those revenue numbers will be.
All right. Well, Mark, we appreciate your stay once again this week.
Sure. Appreciate the opportunity.
That's been this week's edition of the Mark Messmer Legislative Update. Thank you for watching WJTS Inform. We are local people watching local people.